Hi, everybody. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me once again. Sometimes when I listen to the media, I despair. Honestly, I do. So let's talk about Frogmore and the Harkles being evicted. Well, firstly, the term evicted is not exactly accurate. The truth is that their lease is due for renewal at the end of March, and they were informed that this year the lease will not be renewed. And I'm guessing that they have until the 31st of March to remove any remaining personal belongings, or then until the end of their term of lease, and I'm not sure whether that is the end of March or end of April. Never mind. So, okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about the who and why. But before we do that, let's quickly explain who owns the property. Windsor Castle and the lands around it are what is called Crown property. The property is inherited with the office and position of monarch and is not personally owned by the monarch, but by the monarch or king as personification of the crown. So it is also, in a way, then true to say that it is not owned by the country or the government or parliament or whatever either, but rather is owned by the king, although it is not his private property to do with what he wants to either. He cannot sell it, for instance. The crown is what is known as a corporation sole. The ownership of the crown estate is then indeed the crown, which is basically the office of the king. But don't get too excited. Crown properties are managed separately through a semi-independent body consisting of 8 commissioners who run the properties with power of ownership, but obviously without actual ownership. This applies to all the Crown properties except those officially occupied or used as official residences by the king and his first in line to the throne. Those properties are managed by the royal household. Okay, so it sounds complicated, but in simple terms, here are a few examples. Prince Edward leases Bagshot Park. Prince Andrew has a lease on Royal Lodge, and Harry has a lease on Frogmore Cottage. Those leases came with the approval and at the suggestion of Her Majesty the Queen. But in reality, the leases exist between Prince Edward and the Crown Estate, Prince Andrew and the Crown Estate, and Prince Harry and the Crown Estate. Now, when it comes to Prince Andrew's lease of Royal Lodge, I may be off on the amounts, but I am correct on the basics. Andrew entered into a 75-year lease agreement for which he paid £1 million once off. Over and above that, he pays approximately £250 per week or £1,000 per month to the Crown Estate, with whom he entered into the lease with. Well, wow, you say, that is way under market value. Well, yes, that is why it is called a grace and favor home. But the rent is not where the clauses of the lease agreement ends. According to the lease, he is also responsible for the refurbishment costs in order to restore and maintain the historical building. The agreement also states that it requires that the character of the property be maintained as a royal park and forest. And yes, Royal Lodge is set within 21 acres of secluded gardens. So before anyone balks at the rental, take a moment to consider the maintenance and upkeep of such a property. It is indeed a pretty packet. Prince Edward also has a lease on Bagshot Park, 150-year lease to be exact, and that, my dears, cost him a once-off payment of £5 million. Now, I'm not sure what his monthly payment is, but Bagshot Park is a Grade 2 listed building surrounded by 51 acres of land. And again, like with Prince Andrew, Prince Edward will be responsible for the majority of the maintenance and upkeep. And once again, the lease is between Prince Edward and the Crown Estate. When it comes to Harry and Frogmore, we are faced with a slightly different scenario. Frogmore Cottage was utilized as separate apartments for staff. At the time when it became an issue and the two brothers wanted to split their households, Frogmore Cottage was offered to Harry and Meghan, and they accepted, and the process to turn it back into a single dwelling had to happen. So 2.4 million of taxpayers' money was indeed spent, and Harry signed a 2-year lease. However, as you all know, in January 2020, they announced that they were leaving, thus not even a full year into their lease. As we also know, they then, for a while, sublet the property to Eugenie and Jack and had to pay the 2.4 million back to the Crown Estate. We also know that when the initial lease expired in March or April 2021, the Harkles decided to renew the lease in order to have a domicile address in England. But we also know that at one point and for some reason, Eugenie and Jack moved out of Frogmore. Why exactly? I don't know, but it is not because of the supposed move to Portugal, as the media wanted you to believe, as they are still and have always been spending only short periods of time in Portugal and have since moved back to Kensington Palace, where they are now indeed staying in Nottingham Cottage and where they previously stayed in Ivy Cottage. So that basically meant that Frogmore Cottage was standing vacant. Now, we don't know whether Harry is indeed still paying the monthly rent or whether out of anger and petulance he stopped paying. But what I can tell you though is that according to a source, a very, very good source, I have to add the stories that Harry and Meghan paid the full 2.4 million is not exactly true, according to my source. However, I'm not going to put my reputation on the line by stating it as fact, but instead will just say that there is indeed money owed, due, or outstanding, whatever it is for. Okay, now just like Andrew and Edward have to oversee a certain number of staff to maintain their properties, the same would apply to Harry. If there is a burst pipe, a leaking tap, or a hedge that needs cutting back, Harry would be the one who would get or dispatch someone to fix it, and Harry should be the one to pay for it. Now I'm told the Queen was very tolerable and sympathetic, and she would send someone to check the home. She had her staff maintain the garden, and indeed also sent staff to air and dust the home when Harry and Meghan were coming to stay. But as we know, Charles and Camilla are not staying in Windsor and is not planning to either. As we know, William and Catherine moved to Adelaide Cottage in the Windsor estate, and it is now fully accepted that Windsor will become their permanent home, and thus, in the fullness of time, they will likely take over the Queen's living quarters, and thus, sometime in the future, the management of the Windsor estate will be taken over by William's household. Now, just note that maintenance of Windsor Great Park still falls under the Crown Estate under the stewardship of, in the past, Prince Philip and now Prince Charles, which I still think was an egotistical but dumb move. But anyway, okay, so in short, not only do the Harkles still have funds or payments outstanding, but they are also not there to maintain and take care of the property. And there is no way under the sun that after the Netflix docu-series and Harry's book, his brother will in any way go out of his way to assist or accommodate Harry. And quite frankly, under the circumstances, I don't think the king has the time or the will to do so either. Then to also have such a big property standing vacant during a time where the population is struggling with an ever escalating cost of living, and when England's homelessness is on the rise and not shrinking, it is just not a good look. I honestly therefore think that it wasn't so much a matter of King Charles evicting Harry and Meghan, as it would not be his decision alone, but that it was a mutual decision between the King, William, and the Crown Estate Commission. You must also remember that the Crown Estate Commission must also answer to Parliament, and I think certain members of Parliament may also have had something to do with the fact that the lease is not going to be renewed, and for yet another reason. Look, we all know that the only reason why Harry is clinging to Frogmore is because he is using it as a domicile address for tax reasons. At first it was okay, because I know for a fact that most of the senior members of the royal family and senior aides thought that Harry would come back after 2 years. As a matter of fact, Harry himself said that it was a possibility at some point. But 2 years have come and gone, and Harry has made a few poignant remarks in the meantime, such as that the United States is now his home. And in one of his recent interviews, he actually said there is no going back. So I think the penny has finally dropped. And now Parliament does not want to be instrumental to an international tax scam. And therefore, I think Parliament feels that if the United States is now Harry's home, he can just as well pay whatever tax he has to pay in the United States in full, without rebates and concessions. And if he so wishes, he could also apply for citizenship in the United States if his son is allegedly a dual citizen. Then he can be too. This trying to fly under the IRS radar is not quite the right look, is it? But then let's give King Charles the credit he is due. He is, after all, the big boss. And if he said, no, my son stays, it would not have been worth fighting him over it. But then he would also have had to take full responsibility for Frogmore Cottage. And no, I think after Spare, he wasn't going to do that. So what now? I'm sure Meghan and Harry are seething with anger. But it is time They are brought back to earth and time. They are taught that in life, every action has a reaction. And as adults, all of us have duties and responsibilities. I know it is a bit late in life for them to be taught those lessons, but rather late than never, I say. Besides, there are still many, many royal residences and apartments in royal residences they can stay in should they want to visit. There is absolutely no need to keep an entire 5-bedroom home for that purpose. Okay, my friends, so that's it for today. Please take good care of yourselves until we meet again on the next one. Bye.